All right, everyone. So we got another awesome video for you on Death by Lightning. Now, there's going to be big spoilers in this. So if you haven't seen it yet, please put this video in the watch later section of your YouTube account and go watch it first. And then you can come back and, we could listen to what I have to say about it and put in the comments what you think. So if you haven't seen it yet, go do that. I'm going to do as many videos as I can on this because I thought it was such a good show and I want to get it as much, I want to talk about as much as I can, to put it plainly. So we're going to start spoiling stuff. So if you haven't seen it, click out now. Otherwise, you're going to get it spoiled. All right. So this article from Screen Rant is basically talking about the one of the final scenes where Garfield's wife, and First Lady, right? She confronts Couteau, right? So she confronts the man that killed her husband. And she has some really interesting things to say to him, right? She tells him his legacy is going to be nothing. She tells him that she's going to do everything she can to make sure that his book, because you see him when he's in jail, he's doing his best to, oh, this is awesome. People are going to be reading my book about it and understanding what, all of this stuff, right? He thought this was going to make him as famous as can be and that his name will be etched in American history. But she also brings up another important point. And it was interesting because at the time, and if you watch our first video we did on Death by Lightning, we brought this up, which is she mentions it's not only him that's going to be forgotten in history. But one of the reasons he's going to be forgotten in history is because what he did ensured that her husband is going to be forgotten in history. And one of the things I thought, and we're going to go down and get the exact quotes from the creator of him talking about this, right? Because he's saying, look, this is not a real scene. This is not something that actually happened. But what he's pointing out is Guteau, right, by killing Garfield, made Garfield a president that, is just rarely talked about. And it was interesting because you kind of knew that that scene wasn't real. Like I said, we didn't fact check the show, but you kind of knew that that scene probably wasn't what actually happened. But it just got you thinking because you just thought, I mean, they're right. You watch this docu-series and you see a president that's making these major changes. He's taking on, right? I mean, if you have the corruption of the prior administration, right? And a lot of people will say, well, Grant wasn't the one that's corrupt, and there's a lot of truth to that, right? He wasn't the one. But around him was this political machine, right? That was pretty tough to deal with. And Garfield is taking on that political machine. I mean, it's quite amazing what he's able to do in just a short time that he's in office. But you don't really hear much about it. His story isn't told much because he was only there for a couple months, and so it's just fascinating. Them adding in that scene, I think, really sets the stage of. And I said it in our prior video. I said, listen, to me, this just makes the argument of we need more of these type of things on all different presidents, even presidents that don't, because we get to see a lot of the same stories over and over again, and usually those are because they are the most important, right? You hear about Lincoln, right? You hear about the Civil War, of course, right? These are major events, right? These are the big events, but there are all these other things in the lead up to the Civil War, after the Civil War. There's so many other stories that need to be told that just aren't told. And I found that it was really interesting how they turned this really, really short presidency, right? Due to this. They turned all of this into one of the best pieces of political media I've ever seen, right? I just found it amazing. So let's see what he has to say. She comes to see him in prison and tells him that his memory and his legacy will amount to nothing, which is the worst news that he can get. That's the worst thing, that he won't mean anything. Now, this was not a real quote, or this is a real quote, but what she says to him is not a real quote. But let's just be honest about one thing. She's 110% right. She's 100%. I found out that they still have this guy's brain. That was from, I think, the last interview he gave. We did a video on that. They have this guy's brain in some military base. Nobody nobody talks about it, right? Nobody talks about any of this stuff. And it's so, and I think, well, we talked about this in the video we did on the historical accuracy. You could watch that. We did two prior ones. You should watch both of them. And in the historical accuracy one, I pointed out that yes, okay, you need to make sure that the big things are accurate, right? You don't want to have a show that's just filled with like things that don't happen, right? Where you just completely mislead what the audience is doing. But the actual things in the show, right? The conversations, you, what you're trying to do is not necessarily give a like this event happened 100% this way. You're trying to give the themes of what happened, right? And so that's why I think this is such a great final scene, or one of the final scenes, because it isn't something that actually happened, but it's actually telling the exact story that needs to be told. It's like when you see Guteau talking to different politicians, right? Like that are close to Garfield. Did all of these conversations happen, and did we have all the 100% dialogue that happened? No, right? They're making these things up, but they're doing it to tell you this didn't happen per se, right? But this is what did happen, right? This could have happened, right? This exact thing. So I find that interesting. I don't think she was content, just sort of falling into the traditional mores expected of a first lady in 1881. Had she had the ability to affect the level of change that her office entailed, I think she would have been seen as a really positive role model. And unfortunately, almost no one will ever really get to hear about how remarkable she was because of what happened to her husband. It's just one of those things, right? It's just this is entirely the case that you have really, like I said, I was stunned because I hadn't known much about all. I mean, I watched there's another one on there's a documentary on Amazon that talks about kind of his death, right? Because that's another part of this of he gets shot and he's still alive, but the doctors kind of the way the doctor goes about treating him ends up actually killing him, right? And so I had seen a thing on that, but that didn't touch anywhere near everything that this did, and I just hope we get to see more of this. And it's cool to know that this was all thought through. Oh, this is why we're putting this scene in there, right? This is the reason we're doing this. We're going to have this ending scene. And if you, well, I guess at this point, if you're still watching the video, you'll probably have seen this. Otherwise, you just got a lot spoiled. But if even if you've already seen it, go watch that moment again, right? Because that was like a powerful moment, and you see in Guteau, right, when he finds out his book isn't going to be published, you see right at the end before he's executed, right, and he's given the death penalty. He's trying to still get that, he's coming to grips with, and he probably never understands because the dude is messed up, he's evil, right, and he's crazy, but he's trying to get that, like, he's still thinking how delusional he is that, yeah, people are gonna be backing me. Oh, I have the publishers fighting each other over my book. Uh, It's really a wild, wild scene. And even though it didn't happen, and I wanted to do this video because it's not that. Look, I have no interest in fact checking the whole show. Okay, because like we said in one of our prior ones, it's like you try to fact check one thing and then somebody says actually there's this document that says it did happen. So I'm not really interested in fact checking the each and every thing. But when the creator comes out and says, hey, we made this scene up and here's why, and explains it, we're going to do videos on that to kind of talk about it. And so kudos to them of putting that in there because it was a perfect, powerful ending, right? It did, it left you feeling, after I watched that scene, I kind of felt like, you know what? Like, it was one of those things where you were kind of happy Guteau was getting it stuck to him because the dude, I mean, he was so delusional, so evil. It really that ending, you really start to feel, terribly for his wife, the kids, and him himself. Even Garfield at the end. When he's laying there and he's, he kind of knows it's it, right? He's gonna die. This is a guy who wasn't asking for the presidency, right? He just ended up. He stumbled into the presidency. This is a guy that he never showed any sense of self ambition throughout the whole thing, right? Or not much, I should say. Um, and then right at the end, you hear him say, "Do you think I'm going to be remembered?" And just that's so powerful because it's like, okay, this guy was a great guy. This guy wasn't trying to be president, but even in him, right, there was a level of, I want to be a great president, right? I want to do things that are good and I want to be remembered. And so, all of that, how they did that, you feel so emotional and seeing it get stuck to him like that, and then leaving you thinking of, yeah, Why isn't this guy talked about? I understand his presidency was so, was so short, but as the show's ending points out, well, okay, he was only there for what was it, 2 or 3 months. But after, when Chester Arthur takes office, he basically says, okay, because of Garfield, I'm going to institute all these reforms that Garfield wanted. So all of these different reforms, I mean, think about the corruption, right? You could see it right in there, right? You have in this case, it was, what was it, New York, right? That basically New York was running the show. New York was running the show. And this was at a time where the Republicans are just running roughshod, right, in all of these elections. They're winning everything. And yet it's owned for the purpose of benefiting, in this case, I'm forgetting his name now, of course, one of the congressmen there, but he was doing it all for himself. Everything he was doing was for himself, right? And his buddies. And they were all making money and getting rich. And it was Garfield who takes this on. Pretty crazy. So thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time.